You're watching Global Watch on CGTN. Now we turn to the global fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has called for more contribution by the group of 20 countries in the global fight against the pandemic. He was speaking at a Global Health Summit, a virtual conference aimed at coordinating worldwide efforts against the pandemic.
I urge G20 countries in collaboration with the United Nations to assume a strong leadership role in ending this devastating global pandemic. Together, we can and we must build a healthier, safer, fairer and more sustainable world.
At the end of this event, G20 leaders issued a joint declaration to promote sustained financing cooperation for global health. Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen described the statement as groundbreaking and historical. The WHO chief also took part in the summit. He called on G20 members to share more vaccine doses and boost vaccine production. So as we just reported, leaders of the world's largest economies have gathered virtually to discuss a cooperation against the pandemic. 8 pledges have been made for vaccine development, production and global economic recovery. China made bold new commitments at a summit, with President Xi Jinping calling for solidarity in the fight against the pandemic. Sun Ye has more.
China will provide an additional $3 billion in international aid over the next 3 years to support COVID-19 response and economic and social recovery in other developing countries. We have already supplied 300 million doses of vaccines to the world, and we will do our utmost to provide even more vaccines.
To offer as many vaccines to the international community to the best of China's capability. This was one of the pledges delivered by Chinese President Xi Jinping to the G20 Global Health Summit. He also announced China's decision to waive intellectual property rights on COVID-19 vaccines and share know-how with developing countries. He says this are what responsible countries must do at critical times like this, in line with building what China calls a community of health. Last May, President Xi Jinping said that China's vaccines would be made a global public good. It was among the first countries to make such an announcement.
It's been more than a year since COVID-19 struck, but we're still facing so much uncertainty that has come with the pandemic. The world needs confidence, hope and cooperation. So at this critical moment, President Xi Jinping's speech is particularly meaningful for the global fight against COVID-19, for trust in multilateralism, and for the improvement of global health governance.
China has provided vaccine assistance to over 80 countries and offered vaccines to the UN peacekeeping operations and the International Olympic Committee. Chinese President Xi Jinping said at the Global Health Summit that China will continue to make efforts to close the divide in vaccine. Sun Ye, CGTN, Beijing.
For more insight into that, let's cross live to Professor Huang Jie with Peking University. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor. So China is a developing country itself, but it has made new promises and commitments to the global joint fight against the pandemic, and it has done so much in this particular regard. What does this tell about the idea of a community of health for mankind?
As you all know, in this time of pandemic, China, as a developing country, our strong friendly need. In Chinese culture, helping each other is our DNA, and China knew how to do the best. For example, economic development.
Well, it looks like we've encountered some audio difficulties right now. That was Professor Huang Jie with Peking University. Now, US President Joe Biden has come under criticism for not doing enough to help countries in need get their hands on COVID vaccines. He is believed to have only announced under global pressure that US will now share more vaccines globally. In this commentary, my colleague Zhou Yue reflects on the essential precept that no one is safe until everyone is safe.
A pandemic is still ravaging the world, but how quickly are people getting vaccinated for COVID-19? Infections won't stop unless the world is rid of the virus by establishing herd immunity. But the sooner we vaccinate the people, the less the infection. The less the infection, the slower mutating of the virus. The slower mutation, the better we beat this at last. But China has administered 400 million vaccines domestically, inoculating roughly 30% of its population. But the road ahead is still an uphill battle. China hopes to reach herd immunity by vaccinating at least 80% of its population by the end of the year or mid-2022. How do we get there? 80% of China, that is 1.12 billion people. Let's say China wants to reach that goal by the end of 2021. Every month, over 110 million people have to be vaccinated, roughly the population of the UK and South Korea combined. So think about this. Every day, 3.7 million people. Vaccine centers are usually open 8 hours a day. That means every second, 130 people have to be inoculated. In a regular vaccine center like this, 30 nurses work 7 hours a day, every day of the week, to give residents the jab they've been waiting for. America is also catching up with the vaccination, while the US has vaccinated almost half of its population. But it has been unabashedly selfish in the process. The US has produced more than 300 million doses of vaccines and exported about 3 million. Understandably, the Biden administration needs to prioritize domestic supply, as America is still the most infected nation in the world. But turning a blind eye to the world is not the way to lead. More disappointingly, the Biden team wants to claim a more high ground in another way. Washington says it wants to speed up global production. But just to think a little harder, it is not difficult to conclude that not only it will slow down production of the current proprietary vaccines, it will also lead to hoarding of vaccine-making materials, upset the production scheduling, and prevent future vaccine development. Biden's nice-sounding promise will probably get America some false sense of morality, but nothing helpful for the world. That is why it is strongly opposed by even European allies.
Around the country, shots are sitting unused.
It's absolutely damaging the reputation of the developed world. And it's a failure of American leadership.
It is a moral imperative. It is a scientific imperative that we vaccinate the globe, not only to help other people, but to protect us.
But Joe Biden said on Monday that his administration will send at least 20 million doses of U.S. authorized vaccines to other countries in the coming weeks. Well, that is a good sign, although it is still too little and a little late. By comparison, China has shipped 252 million doses overseas, or 42% of its total production. And more encouragingly, the WHO has authorized the first Chinese vaccine for emergency use, and another could be listed in the coming days, opening the door to wide distribution in lower-income nations. Beijing has pledged to donate 17 million doses to 65 countries. The obvious reason is that China has a strong manufacturing capacity and a full economic recovery. And the country has managed to contain the virus spreading within its borders despite low numbers of local infections occasionally. But the deeper reason is China knows its future is connected with the world. COVID teaches one big thing. We need an open global system no matter what. By helping others, we are helping ourselves in a big way.